What's up, guys? Welcome back to OverTakes. This is Misfit, and today we're going to be recapping Week 2 of the Overwatch League's 2022 season. Got a lot to talk about today. We had some really big matches, some stuff starting to flesh out in NA, and some teams making their way up, making their way down, and some teams that we just are whatever. We don't know what's going on with them. A whole lot of other stuff went on. Before we do that, I'd like to thank you guys for joining me. If you've been here for 1 day or for 5 years, thank you very much for your support. It's greatly, greatly appreciated. If you're new, just stopping by, thanks for checking me out. I do Overwatch League content 2 to 3 times a week, depending on what's going on. And I'm glad to have you guys here. Thanks a lot. Jump in, join in the conversation. That's what this channel is all about, in case you're new. I like talking about Overwatch League with you guys. Let's get this ball rolling. And because we have a lot to talk about. There's a lot of fun going on. A lot of different crazy stuff going on in the league. So come on in. Jump in. Also, if you're new, I generally don't script. I have topics laid out, and then I just let it rip, and then we talk about it later. That's how I like working the whole scenario. Okay, so Week 2, Overwatch League 2022. We had a lot going on. I'm going to do things a little differently. Talk about a couple of key matches that things happened. And, of course, it revolves around the fucking teams that we always talk about on this channel and everywhere else in the league, because they're either good, bad, or we don't know what's going on with them in Dallas and Houston. But they played 2 of the most compelling matches of the week, so you got to give it to them. And I'm not taking anything away from them either, by the way. I'm just being my normal self. What I want to do is that we're going to go over down the list. I'm going to give the results, and then I decided, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to write down maybe a sentence, a phrase of what I think of each team and what they've done. So tell me what you guys think about it. It sounded like fun when I was watching it, just not necessarily initial reactions, but reactions post-match of how each team did. So let's run down the schedule. We only had 9 total, so let's do that. All right. Starting on Friday, Florida Mayhem take care of the Vancouver Titans 3-0. San Francisco Shock beat the Houston Outlaws 3-1. In the shocker of the weekend, no pun intended, from the last match, the Washington Justice beat Atlanta 3-0. Potentially, you could call it another back-to-back shocker. The London Spitfire, we're not going to call it shocker. All right, we'll stop calling it a shocker. In Clown Fiesta 3.0, the London Spitfire win 3-1. In another big match of the weekend, the Dallas Fuel come back and reverse sweep the Los Angeles Gladiators 3-2. Then the next match on Saturday, we had the New York Excelsior taking care of Vancouver 3-1. Sunday, the first match, Houston wins by literally a meter, beating the Florida Mayhem 3-2. Kind of like I said, Houston just had a little bit too much. San Francisco Shock play with their food and beat the New York Excelsior 3-1. And the final match of the day, we have the Toronto Defiant beating the Paris Eternal 3-0. Okay, so that's the rundown of what happened in the Overwatch League this weekend. Before we dive into teams and whatnot and what have you, let's talk about meta. We saw a lot of switch in the meta. We saw we saw a lot of that Zarya Reaper comp Dallas was running, and Hanbin had come out and said that he's one of those, in APAC they're running it, so they thought they would try it kind of things. And I said it, I don't know if you guys remember, but I did say it a couple weeks ago that I think it was Fleta and maybe Lip, a couple of guys from Shanghai at least, said that Zarya is really strong if you run her in the right comps the right way. And it seems to be something that's gaining steam. A lot of teams are trying it, running it. And I kind of like it, especially when you're facing the Doom comps that some of these teams are running, doing some of that stuff. My whole take on this is that it's a great way to engage. And some teams varied it up too. It's most of the same comp that we're used to seeing. Generally a soldier, possibly a tracer, and then you have your Ana Lucio, Yeah, sometimes on certain maps you're getting Brig thrown in there now, which is cool because I think Brig is low-key really good in certain comps in certain scenarios, especially when you slow things down. Just playing on my own, playing the support role, I'm not the best Brig, but you can gain a lot of value just because heal up time, repair packs, fantastic ultimate. You have the shield bash that does some damage and is an escape now. Because of the distance, she's really good in certain scenarios. Anyway, off the Brig. But what I really like is the engagement tool that the Zarya Reaper gives you. In that, obviously, you have to be in LOS with the Zarya and the Reaper, but the Reaper teleports in, bubble on Zarya. Zarya gets massive charge. I like that a lot because I think Zarya, minus the mobility factor in this iteration of Overwatch, she provides a lot of damage when you get that Reaper in. The Reaper goes in there covered with the barrier and is free to just blast those shotguns into people's faces, get up really close and tight, and they don't have to burn another cooldown. You just wraith out, and your Zarya is full blast, ready to go. I like it a lot. It's fantastic thinking on whoever came up with it, in my opinion. Especially when you're doing things like you're going in against Doom and stuff like that. I'm a Sombra fan, and I think eventually you're going to see more Sombra play to counter this. We'll see what happens when we get to see some East matches, some APAC matches. I think they're going to do a lot of different comps that are going to kind of not blow our minds, but make us think a little bit differently, because we're seeing the Doomfist dive, and we're seeing some of the Winston, and we're seeing a lot of the stuff. We're starting to see some of the Zarya stuff trickle in. I think when the East shows their hand, we're going to see some different stuff, and I think it's going to be cool and fun, because they love Sombra. They're going to do the Zarya thing from what we've been hearing. But I really like that Zarya comp. It counters. It's kind of a Overwatch 2 good counter dive, because as far as engagements go, when they engage in with a Winston or a Doom, especially when you have an Ana, you can get the things like sleep darts, anti-nades, and then I really like it when they run a Reaper Tracer, because if you guys watched what Washington, they didn't really run Zarya as much. They did run some Zarya, but the biggest key to what they were doing was Decay came into play, but the harassment on Doom with, you anti-nade or sleep, and then Decay is in there harassing him, Dante that is, on Doomfist, constantly. He's not going into engages with full health pools. Yeah, he can go in and get some of that armor in there, or whatever it's called now, shielding, overhealing, whatever it happens, the blue. But I think that there's ways with this. Now, if you went in against them, and we saw the Mayhem be the first team to start running some Sombra, better than their Roadhog choice by far. Yeah, it's a little fast because they did tune her down a little bit, but I think just for harassment's sake with a Doomfist, once it fleshes out, I think Sombra's going to come in to be a big play. And if you know that they're running that, I think she'd be a good counter as well to the Zarya Reaper thing, just because the hacks, and also when she's in stealth, she can ping. You can ping in stealth, and yeah, these guys are talking, but if you're pinging and, in the middle of action, and you guys play, you understand what's going on. Some of you guys are in the beta. But I really like the kit or the utility that Sombra can bring to some of this stuff now. I think we're going to start seeing a little bit more of her, because she's going to negate some of those things. Yeah, it's only 1 second, but in this league, 1 second's an eternity when you have a Zarya that can't bubble or a Reaper that can't wraith out. Focus fire, they're pretty much close to done, and there's nothing to worry about. We're seeing some different stuff coming in, and it's good. Yeah, I know I just rambled on for like 45 seconds about Sombra. I understand that. I think she's important. I said this in 2018 when she was fairly new. Teams didn't really know how to use her, but once they did, she's an invaluable tool, especially if you add the wall hacks in with characters like Doomfist. He hides around a corner and she's like just lurking around, hacks him. You know where he is. You know where he's setting up from. Same thing when you're going with these Reapers and things like that are coming in the back lines. I think she's one of the most low-key best heroes in Overwatch 2. You add the EMP, it's not as impactful as it was before, but you take 40% damage and you drop a attack visor onto that, you're looking at a good ult combo there. But also meta-wise, we still saw a lot of 76. Still, they're playing on the patch before. They're playing on the initial Overwatch 2 beta. They haven't changed the patch or anything like that. So they're still doing what we started the beta with. But I'm liking seeing some diversity. Am I excited about a slower pace? Not really. On some maps, though, I do like it. Push was a lot harder, or a lot easier to watch this week because we saw some actual strategy-ish things come out, setups, things like that on that game mode. Fairly new, and these guys are just trying things out. And once you get in a live, it's great to scrim things. But when you get into a live match and shit starts going all over the place, you just kind of fall into the chaos. Yeah, that's my thoughts on the meta. All right, so I'm going to do this segment. I don't know what to call it. It's not really stonks type of... It is, but it isn't. But these are just my thoughts on some of the teams and what they did this weekend. Okay, so we're just going to start off, and we talked about the schedule. We talked about what happened. Here's some thoughts I had. Just one sentence on each team. Glads being Glads. The Gladiators did a classic Gladiator move against Dallas. You think they're great, and then you could call it, I hate the dropping the spaghetti thing. The shit the bed, whatever you want to call it. That Lighthouse match, they just threw that out the window against Dallas, where they should have won, and they failed. So Glads being Glads. Dallas is fine. Dallas is where I thought they were going to be. They had a hiccup against Houston. They're fine. Houston's shaky at best. Now, yes, they beat the Mayhem. They should have beat the Mayhem. Preseason, we thought they would have slaughtered the Mayhem. They lost to Toronto. They did beat Dallas really bad, but they got buried by the Shock. I don't care what you say, the Shock owned them in that match. So, Houston isn't Houstoning. They're a little better than Houstoning. Houston's shaky. Mayhem, better than advertised. I nailed it. I'm calling them, and I think I called them that in my power rankings. They're the gatekeeper. They're we can't beat the teams above us, but we will annihilate the teams below us, which is basically in NA, teams, I would call it 7 and down, teams 5 and up, they're not going to beat. They had a chance to beat Houston, but they just didn't have enough yet. That team looks good, and they're going to make some noise later, but right now, I'm calling them gatekeeper. Shock are fucking good. Deal with it. That's my thoughts on them. I didn't want to believe it. A lot of you guys didn't want to believe it. Yeah, they played 3 of their games were crap, but they handled Houston pretty damn easily, and they pretty much played with the Shock, or the NYXL. This team full of rookies is going to be very freaking dangerous. Washington, they're good when Decay decides he wants to play. They annihilated Atlanta. They annihilated Atlanta because Decay was on his game, playing Tracer, and just causing havoc with the rain. One other thing about Washington, really quick. As much shit as everyone's given Krillin before the season, that dude looks pretty damn good, and you cannot lie and say that he doesn't. Majority of the time, Krillin has been playing really good. Toronto is better than I thought they were. I will admit that. I was wrong. They look good. Paris is worse than I thought they were, and there's more of a mess in that team than I thought. I didn't go over it, but they got rid of Naga, and, well, first they signed Wub, American Tornado. He's really good. Wub's good. And then they got rid of Naga. There's internal shit going on in that team that we don't know about, and they look like hot garbage. Speaking of Garbo, Boston, and Vancouver are Garbo. I'm not going out on a limb here. Vancouver, for the amount of talent they have on that team, is misrun. Same thing with Boston. They should at least be competitive in some of these games, and they're getting smacked. They got absolutely crunched by London. London, better than advertised. I don't think they're great. Atlanta, still really good. Had a hiccup this week. I'm not worried about Atlanta, much like I wasn't worried about Dallas. I thought Atlanta had a little trip up, they weren't ready for what Washington was going to do. Decay showed up. Happy looked good. That's my take on the teams. Tell me if you guys like that. It's just, I've been going to the end of the match and kind of just writing a sentence down of what I think each team did. And I kind of compiled it over the weekend. So that's what I thought about the teams. To me, after talking about these teams, just really quick, one last thing. The two most disappointing teams that we've seen so far right now, to me, are Boston and Paris. I thought they would be a lot better than they were. Maybe not a lot, but they have some players that have made some big plays and done some good stuff. Cons looked really good for Paris, and a couple of guys have done some stuff on Boston, but on the whole, they have just been really not good. On the whole, they've been terrible. It's kind of disappointing. On the other end, I have to say that Toronto is looking legit. Yeah, they wrecked Paris pretty badly, but you know, they beat Houston, who is 2-2. Houston beat some good teams. They played some good teams. So, you know, Toronto's look good. A couple of mistakes on my part, but, you know, it happens. I went out on a limb and said Toronto wasn't good. Rethinking now, I still think things, once metas and things like that get more fleshed out and some of the better teams start playing like we expect them to do, that they could fall a little bit more. But on the whole, Toronto looks good. I'm gonna say that out loud. But let's talk about a couple of the matches that happened this weekend. We'll talk about them for a little bit and then end this episode and get ready for a weekend with APAC, which like I said in previous episodes, I will be doing a separate preview for that compared to NA, just because of the amount of games. And it's just me, so I want to be prepared and get you guys ready, and I want to talk about both. But the first match we're going to talk about, probably the best match of the weekend in the Dallas Gladiator match. It's a tale of two matches, as usual with the Gladiators. I really like what they were doing. They look good. I like their team a lot. I don't think that this is any kind of foreboding or future look at what this team does. They don't have as much synergy as a team like Dallas. So Dallas, they played with each other for a year, and we saw Dallas slip up and trip a couple of times. They didn't look necessarily great at points in the early in the season, and then they picked it up, and once they got used to playing with each other in live matches and all that, they were fine. The Gladiators owned this match. Dallas gave them a little bit of a run on Gibraltar. It was close, but I was liking what Kevster was doing, and Ons looked pretty good. She was always good, so I'm never worried about that. And the thing with Dallas is that they looked out of place, honestly, when Fearless was in there. When they run that Zarya comp with Hanbin, they look way, way better to me. And you notice that, like, from map 3 on, Dallas didn't really look back. Now, the key moment in this whole match, to me, was on Ilios. Yeah, it was back and forth on a couple of the other ones, but Ilios, on that Lighthouse match towards the end, it seemed like a done deal for the Gladiators to win that. They were up 71, I think they had 71, 72%, and the Fuel were just fumbling big time. You didn't think they had a grasp on what they needed to do on there. Mr. X kept saying they probably should run the Zarya comp on that map, which, you know, you could say what you want. They were running Diva as their tank. They were just getting no value out of anything. The Gladiators looked like they were just poised to clean up and call it a day, and Hanbin switches to Winston. And He played probably some of the best Winston that I've seen anyone play for a bit. It threw him for a loop because I don't think they were expecting it, A. B, he knew all of the tech, how to do all of the things that you need a Winston to do, and he was just cleaning house. And it got to the point where they equaled what the Fuel had fairly easily, and then it came down to the last fight, and they had a blade and I believe a beat. And the Fuel just took it to them in that last match, or last part of that map. And they ended the match that was pretty well fought back and forth by just booming the Gladiators, who thought I'm assuming, thought that they were winning this match because they had no answers on Ilios, the Fuel that is. But the Fuel did things that, that they did last year. Good coaching and good players, this is what happens. You have a guy like Hanbin, who's versatile. Off tank, you don't think he can play Winston. He goes into a pro match and turns the tide and wins that map for them. That was huge. It made the push map at the end seem kind of pointless. Because you could feel Dallas's momentum after that. They were in their comfort zone, and you could feel the Gladiators on their heels even more than they were in the map before, where they lost, where you're just like, they lost the map, and then on Ruins, they kind of owned Dallas, and they started owning them on Lighthouse, on Ilios, and you're like, okay, well, Dallas put up a fight, blah, 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 this is what it's going to be. Gladiators ruined my pick'ems. I would have had another match right with all the map picks. I believe I lost 3 matches, but 3 of the 6 that I won in my pick'ems, I got the map predictions right. So there's that. But this is one of the matches that I got wrong for obvious reasons. But Dallas proved that they should be up there. The Gladiators need to work on some coordination and some other stuff. They look good. They look like one of the best teams in NA, mind you. Dallas just looked better than them on Saturday. So the next match and the last thing we're going to talk about, as good as that match was, the Houston Florida match was fantastic. I thought it was going to be 3-2. I said 3-2 Houston, and I said Houston's just got a little bit more. They had 1 meter more than the Mayhem. Which, as a Mayhem fan, looking at the roster before the season started, I said, okay, there's some promise. I knew a couple of the guys that were coming in. But they've proven to me, some of them that I didn't know too much about, like Sir Majed, fantastic. He's playing really, really well. I'm glad that Gunba is working his match. I think someone looks good. I think, honestly, and this is me, if you know me from last year, Onimo is playing really, really well. He had moments today, though, where he was just getting outclassed by Lastro, who out of nowhere is a Lucio fucking main, and is lethal at that. He did what he's been doing did last weekend. But the main thing I've noticed with the Mayhem is they're not good on the push map, and that came back to bite them in the ass, where they lost 2 of the maps that they lost in this match were the push map. And you're going to have to get good at this, especially when they move the rotation around. I think they moved it around too because nobody saw. Well, there's a lot of matches, 3-1s, 3-0s. You weren't getting, well, actually 3-0s. You weren't getting to the push map, so they moved to the front this weekend. The Mayhem looked good on Route 66. They did Houston pretty dirty on Lijiang Tower. Now, they were running a lot of that. They were running into that Zarya comp too. And, that's fine. They look good playing it. I think it's going to take some coordination, some different stuff when a meta switches like this for different teams to adapt. But they ran some Sombra. And you guys know I'm a big fan. And the thing is with Sombra right now, you're kind of getting the feast or famine. We saw that mostly on the last map when they were doing the on push on Toronto, New Queen Street. Checkmate was doing a good job of messing with Dante and just hacking him and keeping him in check. But one of the biggest problems I saw with it was Merritt had free reign. And right now with Soldier 76, they're playing on not on the initial patch. The first patch that was last Monday on the beta. They're not playing on that. They're playing on the initial beta damage, etc. Before any reworks or not reworks necessarily, any kind of patches or buffs, nerfs. With that Soldier iteration, and you have it in pro play, and you let Merritt run around free reign, he's going to do some insane amounts of damage, which he did. And Merritt, honestly, I'm liking the way this guy plays. Pelican did a fantastic job too. He played some Echo, some Genji. He was just all over the place, causing a lot of problems for the Mayhem. The Mayhem, I don't want to make this sound like a one-sided Mayhem discussion here. They did run Piggy on one map. They ran him on 66. They were running a Zarya. They were running some Zarya on there. It looked okay, but they're leaning into the Doomfist thing still. I don't know how much longer it has, because they've had some issues, and so has Atlanta this week with Washington. I think once teams start figuring it out, you're going to see a lot less of that. I think the Zarya comps are going to come into play a lot more. But, Houston proved that they're one of the better teams in NA to me. They fought a Florida team that was underrated before the season started, but coming in to this match after Houston lost to Toronto and San Francisco back-to-back, you're wondering, okay, is Houston being Houston again? But they came in and they did what they needed to do. It wasn't clean. It wasn't the best thing that Houston's put out there this season by far, but they looked like a team that could clutch up and win matches. Whereas Florida looks like they're good, but they're not quite there yet. And that push map that those two played at the end of on Toronto, that was probably the best push we've seen. We're seeing like more stuff start to flesh out and how to play that, and that's great. But it seemed like Houston just had a little bit more skill and experience and all the things at this point, because you got to take into consideration that outside of Onimo, and sure you could throw in Checkmate, Mayhem doesn't have that much experience in Overwatch League. So, and with each other, I mean, obviously the same thing with Houston with each other, but you have Lastro, Iris, Pelican, Merritt is one of the only rookies that they've been running. So, and mostly Dante. You got Overwatch League experience. So they're used to some of the battles, and they played some big matches last year. It's just that the Mayhem just didn't have enough. I wouldn't say weren't. They did not have enough to beat them. And what I saw from Houston in that match is they're pretty resilient, and they took care of their business. They were a easy enough finishing out against London and Paris, in my opinion, for them. So you're looking at potentially being in the Kickoff Clash tournament, which is where you want to be. They're 2-2, but, it's a solid 2-2. Mayhem, solid 2-2, kind of where you thought they would be. And losing to Houston and Atlanta, beating Paris and Vancouver, seems about right for them. Gatekeeping, being that middle team. Now, their next match is against the Excelsior, probably a win. And then they have the Justice to end it out, which could be a really big match, and we'll probably end up talking about it. Washington's 2-1, 3 tough games in Toronto, Atlanta, and Dallas, and they came out ahead in 2 of them. So you can't really knock Washington right now. And they're most likely, unless they Washington it, they got Paris and Boston next week, so most likely 2 wins. But enough about that. And you know what, guys? That's going to do it for this one. We're starting to see things flesh out a lot more. Not necessarily meta-wise. We have teams running Winston comps. We have teams running Zarya comps. We have teams running the Doomfist. London's doing their rush stuff. It's kind of chaotic still. It's not quite as chaotic as it was last week. But I think next week we're going to see a lot more in NA. Now, we get the first week next week of APAC play. And that's going to be fun. But that's going to do it, guys. Thanks a lot for joining me. If you've been tuning in for 1 day or 5 years, thank you very much. for all of your support. If you've made it to the end of the video and this is your first time here, thank you very much for stopping by, checking me out. It's greatly, greatly appreciated. Anyone's support for me, I love it. Thank you. If you're new, please hit a like, hit a subscribe. That would be great. All the YouTube jazz. This is Misfit. I'm out. Everybody stay safe. Have a good rest of your day. And I will talk to you on the next one.